All right, so we're going to go ahead and kick things off here. First, let me thank everybody for joining. I'm so glad that you could participate in today's discussion. I think it's going to be a great one. Remember that we want your comments, your feedback, your perspective. So please use the video and audio to ask questions, provide feedback, and there's also the chat. We like it when the chat gets going as well. So as much as possible, please be on video. If you can remain muted until we get to the interactive discussion, it just helps minimize some of the background noise. So that would be great. So let me kind of kick things off here and introduce Casey Kosteka. Casey is going to be our facilitator for today's discussion. We're going to mix things up a little bit and kind of put David on the back burner and give him a little bit of a break. Many of you probably know Casey. He is a CCNG member, author of the 7T Success System, been around the industry and CCNG for quite a while. So from this point on, Casey, I'm going to let you get us started.
Thanks, Michelle. And I want to thank David and Michelle and CCNG for putting on not only this town hall meeting, but all of the past meetings and the future meetings. I think this is great for the industry. When I started out, we didn't have this kind of technology, and we didn't really even have this organization because it started long after I've been in the business. So this is it's a great organization that you're all a part of. I want to introduce our discussion leader and then let him take over today. And our discussion leader for today is Greg Salvato. Greg's been in the contact center industry since the late 1980s when I met him, back when I was in Columbus, Ohio, and we were working for a company called CUC International. Since after he left CUC, Greg has been in a variety of roles: senior executive in the investment banking world. He's been a CEO and board member of several software and web services companies. And currently, Greg is the CEO of Touchpoint One, a organization that provides technology and tools for the contact center industry. Greg lives in New Albany, Ohio, just outside of Columbus, with his wife and 2 sons. And he is going to be a great discussion leader today. So Greg, it's all yours.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks everybody for attending today. It's good to see everyone. Appreciate the time. I've attended a couple of these sessions before, and it always amazes me all the insights and discussions that come out of these presentations. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion in particular. As Casey said, I'm the CEO of Touchpoint One, and we spend day in and day out, year after year, working with companies really in the context of performance management for large contact center operations. And as kind of fundamental to what sort of modern performance management systems do is, providing awareness and intelligence about lots of different facets of the customer contact organization. Today, our focus is really on the frontline leader, the supervisor, and very critical to the success of the organization. In fact, I always say that there isn't any other resource that possesses greater capacity to influence what matters most in the contact center organization besides the supervisor. They are sort of, again, from my perspective, sort of like mini CEOs. I mean, if you look at from the standpoint of the budgets that they control and things like that, I mean, these are small organizations by themselves. So there's a lot of responsibility there. And to really get to understanding where their limitations are, what's holding them back, what's key to their success is something that's of great interest to us every day. And it varies from industry to industry. So what I'm going to do today, a couple of years ago, we did a really interesting type of survey. We do a lot of surveying within our application just to mine information from the employees within the contact center. And let me get to my slide here. But we asked very specific questions of supervisors specifically, and also of senior leaders who are the ones that were responsible for providing what they needed to succeed. So, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this was, one, get responses on these things, but also to sort of analyze the potential disconnect between the perspectives of those frontline leaders and what the senior leaders actually thought that they were providing, but might not have been doing such a great job of. So we asked 3 questions of supervisors. One, what is the most useful thing provided to you by your employer to help you succeed? What is the one thing you wish your employer would provide you to help you succeed? And 3, on a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent are you provided by your employer with what you need to succeed? Now, on the flip side, the questions to the senior leaders were kind of similar, but oriented around their role. What is the most useful thing that you or your organization provides specifically to supervisors to help them succeed? What is the one thing you'd like or plan to provide specifically to your supervisors to help them succeed? And then finally, on a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent are you providing supervisors what they need to succeed? So some really interesting questions that were a little bit different maybe than the usual queries that you might present to employees within the organization. So as you might expect, the answers were really interesting. And I'm just going to start, and some of the highlights are in this summary slide that you're looking at right now. But 36% of supervisors cited increased compensation and financial incentives as the most important to enabling their success. And we could probably do a whole hour at least just on wages, financial compensation, and other types of incentives because of all of the macro things going on right now with wage pressures and increases in inflation. Just the transition that's going on in the customer contact environment as well, working in these different environments for hybrid and work from home and all of that. The one noteworthy thing about this particular stat that we received is that it represented really the biggest disconnect between these two roles within the organization. So you had 6% of supervisors really citing this increase in competition as key to their success, but only 6% of the senior managers actually mentioned increased pay and incentives in response to question 2 for them. None of them named it as the most useful. And so this really represented the biggest gap, not probably terribly surprising, but it's a gap nonetheless. And I think that, having that information and that kind of knowledge is better than not having it, because you really, it's undeniable. And it's, if you're in a leadership position, it's something you probably have to think about and address because it is real. So here's the first question to all of you, because we could spend hours talking about this alone, especially with regard to all of your individual dispositions and backgrounds on this. But anybody have any comments just about wage pressures, supervisors specifically, how they have to contend with that and how it impacts attrition and agent attendance and morale and all of those things? Any thoughts about this?
Hey, Greg, I had a quick question. Maybe you covered it and I missed it, but what was the date of when you collected all this information? Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, during the pandemic?
This is pre-pandemic.
Okay, so I wonder if those numbers are going to be different now, given what people have been through in the last 18 months. Or do you have an opinion on that?
Well, my guess is that I think that the number that would be different is that senior managers, that 6% number would probably be higher, because there's and it might not necessarily be a function of pre or post pandemic, but there's definitely an economic reality in terms of inflation and higher wages and competition for talent that senior leaders, have to understand that, well, they're all responding to that. Everybody's base wage rates are going up across the board in every industry. So I think that's where I would expect to see sort of a closing of that disparity between those two numbers.
I saw a study that was done by one of the larger staffing services in the country, and there were 10 things that they said were important to frontline agents and supervisors in contact centers, and the one that took the biggest leap in importance was training, mentoring, and leadership. It was all kind of under one category. But what seems to be important to more today than it ever has been is people wanting to join an organization that is going to help them grow and develop so they can advance, whether within that same organization or within another organization. And they say that the survey had mentioned that that's a result of the whole pandemic and people kind of rethinking their, what's important in their life. And a lot of folks, well, I think it's also because a lot of contact centers were forced to increase labor rates anyway. But to your question, in a second, I'd like to hear, did rates increase for agents? We know that they did in most call centers based on a lot of surveys we've done and other people. But did they increase for supervisors? And is that as important today, the wages, as other things like training, mentoring, and improving skill sets so folks can advance?
Yeah, well, from the rest of the survey responses, again, we're looking at sort of the number one thing that supervisors cited is important to their success. But as we go through the rest of the survey, you're going to find that, recognition and training is huge. In fact, training is number two. Before I move on to my next point, any other comments just about wages? Because I know this is just such a hot topic these days that everybody's really struggling with. Any other comments? Not necessarily related to this particular survey, but just in general that might be helpful to the group.
I mean, I believe that this is David, and I believe that the wage issue is going to continue to increase, and it's probably driving some companies that really have resisted going offshore or to other markets to leave and at least consider a partial use of offshore call centers because of the economics of it. So I think that's a factor that we're going to see going forward.
I agree. So now you've touched on, permanent versus transitory inflation, cultural issues that are driving, the viability of onshore versus, offshore. Again, that's another, it's another hour discussion.
Hey, Greg, before you go, Michelle, can you go back to that slide that I actually skipped over at the beginning by mistake? But it'll give the group here an idea of some of the issues and that the supervisors face today. Right there, there you go. So today's discussion. How do supervisors manage remote teams? And is anything any different in today's world than it was, say, 18 months ago when, there were certainly virtual operations, but there was a lot of, there were a lot of folks or companies that ran purely in-house. Now everybody to some extent is virtual. So, 360-degree communication and engagement with their team, goal setting and dissemination, tracking work and communicating performance results back to agents, and these are all like the challenges supervisors face in today's world, conducting one-on-one meetings and conducting coaching sessions, reinforcing and cultivating the company culture. I mean, how do you do that virtually versus when everybody was in an office, building trust and rapport? Is that any different in a virtual environment versus face-to-face? And how is how do you conduct team building and motivational activities? It's not like you can ask people to, bring in a potluck item and set up a break room for your team. You have to do this kind of stuff virtually. So these are just some things to give you an idea of, what we would love to learn today from you guys. And so I'd love to hear your feedback, and I know Greg would too, of, are these things challenges? They seem to be in every, contact center in today's world versus previously, or at least they've always been challenges, but they're being attacked differently today. So think about these as Greg, moves on. I see Catherine has a note here. Can you describe who answered the survey, Greg?
Yeah, I think on that summary slide, it's a let's see if I can find it. I know Michelle had a slide on that. We surveyed, it was about, I'm guessing 400 or 500 survey respondents total. So it wasn't thousands, but it was also a very specialized kind of survey. So we had some number of 100, let's say 300 to 400 supervisors that we had access to. And then senior leadership, I think there was maybe 80 to 100. So it was not, and it's a difficult group to get, approval for, because we were going through all of our own clients and getting their approval to do this survey, and it was anonymous and all these things, but it was a big enough sample, right? That the responses were meaningful and definitely worth analyzing. Certainly our customers appreciated the feedback. So hopefully that answers your question.
Jason, it looks like you've got your hand raised. Do you have a question or a comment to make?
Yeah, just a comment really. It's going back to the wages. So we actually did a talent review process of all our critical roles across our organization. We're facing the same recruitment tsunami as probably everybody else is at the moment. And supervisors were identified as critical roles and in call centers across the whole of Baxter, and they have been offered retention bonuses linked to future developmental opportunities within the organization. So it's sort of like a get-give. So we give them the money and we get from them a period of time that they're going to commit to the organization, as well as improving their development, whatever that is, to move them on to the next level. So yeah, it's something very keen for us at the moment. We've identified a lot of roles, but supervisors are one of them that were key.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, that's creative. The retention bonus, that's interesting. That's smart.
Yeah, and just returning to the list that you went through, that half dozen or so things, and the importance of training. And I think this is probably going to tie in, Jason, to the programs that you have too. I mean, it's one thing to have those programs, and then you're figuring out like what is it that you need to train on. So, and this is something we think about a lot, even just how technology can facilitate these things. It's one thing to say, okay, perhaps we're having challenges here and we need to train to something like, working with a virtual environment or things like that. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of skill sets that are technology related, communications related, leadership related, all of those relationship building things that are absolutely critical with these remote teams. And so, there's got to be a lot of really very thoughtful consideration in terms of like, what's the impact to training there? In our survey, just to tie back to this, 31% of supervisors identify training as the one thing they wish their employer would provide more of, second only to higher wages and financial incentives. So it's there. It's been there pre-pandemic. It's heightened more than ever now. And I got to, back to David's point, my guess is that number would be maybe even higher today. I don't know if it'd be higher than wages, but higher. And the good news here is that there's a lot more alignment on this between senior management and frontline management that we saw. 38% of senior leaders indicated training as the one thing they'd like or plan to provide specifically to their supervisors more of to help them succeed. So there's good alignment there, where on the pay side, not so much. But here on the training side, we saw that alignment. So it was refreshing. And I'm sure that remains today.
I see Owen has his hand raised as well. That's if I'm seeing that correctly there. Owen?
Yeah. Thanks for calling on me. And I know I was just curious, hearing all this feedback about wages, if people had any feedback here about thinking about automation. Does the increase in wages make people think about now's the time to think about using AI or automation to either better empower their existing staff or try to automate in cases where they're automate their way out of some of these staffing crunches?
Yeah, we put a lot more gasoline under our conversational AI program. It was dragging feet within the organization, and because of this tsunami that we're seeing in these gaps in our call centers, we have now got huge investment from our IT partners to move it on. It's like that's the future. We can't keep on being in this recruitment issue all the time and having to pay folks more. So yeah, it's definitely helped to get that back on the agenda and to put some gasoline under it to make it happen sooner.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, one of the things that we've seen at BizJuice is to that point, Owen, absolutely more people are automating where they can, which means that the companies that are never going to get rid of frontline agents, those the calls or the transactions, the chats, the email, whatever, that they are handling are going to be the more complex variety of calls, where because AI and robotic process automation, those are going to pick off the low-hanging fruit, the easier calls. So, which in a way, it certainly eases the need for the volumes of frontline, call center employees coming in, as well as, subsequently the supervisors, but the level of talent and skill set and training that those remaining supervisors and agents are going to need is at a much higher level, because the transactions are going to be those that automation can't quite yet handle. So, which really is going to make this whole discussion on are supervisors equipped with what they need to succeed in today's world. Today's world meaning partly they're going to get a higher, more complex type of call coming through after AI picks off the easy ones. So I think that makes this discussion all the more interesting and timely.
Thanks. Yeah. And I just think one thing to add too is we all know that those really high touch calls will not be automated, and those customers want a human touch, but anything you can also do to shorten the handle time. So can you use AI to be gathering just those initial things to pull up the CRM record? Can you get the basics so that by the time they connect to the person, that agent who's that really high value agent is spending their time as efficiently as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And think about what that's going to do to, say, a quality assurance process. A lot of the quality assurance folks are checking for, did you ask for the membership number? Did you ask these basic? Well, they're not going to need that anymore because AI is going to do that. So it'll be more those listening and grading and coaching processes are going to be more geared toward listening, soft skills, and really understanding the complex issues.
Yep. And I would agree that, whether it's AI, machine learning and, really pure AI, or whether it's, robotic process automation, or it's even just leveraging analytics more and more, we see huge trends now in, systemizing, digitizing workflows and processes, whether they're around QA, whether they're around compliance monitoring, whether they're around agent coaching. So when you're able to track these things in a digitized way, and I think just like with these, AI type of projects, these kind of projects that have, where you've got departments that are relying on, manual processes that for whatever reason just never got on the front burner for, digitization, are really being accelerated. And I think there's plenty of stories out there just about the increase in technology expense across all these different categories that companies are dealing with now, because you can't survive without it. But once you have that intelligence, a lot of these things can be automated. A lot of these things can be handled by AI. If nothing else, it provides you a wealth of information where you're tracking metrics around routines and workflows that you just couldn't do before. So when you're tying that back to training budgets and things like that, you're able to pinpoint and really custom tailor training programs for even specific to frontline leaders based on where their areas of strength and where the areas of opportunity are. So, if somebody needs leadership training, communications training versus something else, you're able to back that up with data, because these routines are digitized and you're monitoring and collecting those metrics.
I'd like to ask the group. So get ready, because I'm going to ask you guys as a group, and then I might call on somebody if we don't get some comments here. But I've always been curious, and especially today. When you promote, a lot of times the supervisors come from the frontline staff. It's that person that's the best, one of the best on the team. They've shown that they show up every day. They're reliable. They're, they score well in all their KPIs and things like that. But in from our experience, on Friday, the person gets promoted to supervisor. He's a senior agent or something like that, and then on Monday, they start with their team, and that's it. There's really no training, which is mind-boggling, but there's no, interim period where that person who got promoted from the floor gets trained on how to be a supervisor. I'm just wondering, in your contact center organizations, do you find that you're you're filling your supervisor positions primarily from internal candidates that were at a level below? And if so, do they go through a formal supervisory training program before they actually take over their team?
One thing I'll say is that We do a grooming first so that we know who we are likely to promote. And so we start with them, perhaps do a senior agent and then a type of low-level team leader where they're part on, part off. Then we developed a supervisor certification where once they've gone through the grooming period where we've done the basics of what it takes to lead and to coach and to train or whatever their role is. And I think that's another thing that really differs among call centers is what is your supervisor doing? How much admin, how much coaching? Are they giving the feedback from QA or is QA doing some of the coaching and they're doing some of the coaching? So I think the role definition varies significantly among call centers, but we found that the certification program was critical to us to have really well-groomed, very talented people to do exactly what you just said, Casey, is don't just throw them into the fire. Because they're going to fail at some point, and then they're going to go towards the task that they're most comfortable with. You have some supervisors who love reports and they'll go to the reports and they'll go to the data and they're great at it, but they hate coaching, and so they never spend time with their people. So we had to groom them and develop an actual certification program for them to succeed.
That's great, Catherine, and you're right. In fact, I actually have talked about that in the past, that supervisors need to learn all the aspects of leadership, not just gravitate toward the one or two things that they're comfortable with. They need to know how to set targets. They need to know how to team build and track data and, even understand the technological tools that they and their team have available and know how to leverage those to the maximum. So there are many aspects of leadership in a supervisory position that need to be taught. So I'm assuming I'd love to talk to you offline because I'd love to know what that certification program includes. And I will ask you one specific question. Does part of it include, techniques for building, reinforcing the company culture? Because I'm interested in how that's done virtually versus in a office setting. How do they reinforce the company values and work ethics and things like that remotely? And is that part of your training class?
It is part of our training, and we've had to change with the remote style. And so a lot of it has had to be, how do you communicate virtually? Because the brand to us, they communicate the brand to their team in the same way that their team is communicating the brand to our external consumers. And so the way they treat their team has to be brand oriented. And so they have to be very aware of what that means. And in every communication and every task they assign, it includes a brand element. Absolutely.
That's great. Sounds like you've got obviously you've really thought this through, and sounds like you've got a great program in place. And
I wish it all worked all the time.
I like your background too.
Oh, thank you.
Catherine, I have a follow-up question to that too. So the certification process is awesome. And I love the alignment between, customer experience and employee experience and, through all of that. So after certification, you've received this, how are the elements of that, what you've achieved through certification are, monitored or managed post-certification?
The interesting thing we've had to do, which I don't know a whole lot of other people have done, is that we created in the same way that you have a calibration and quality monitoring of an agent, we had to develop that for the supervisor or the coach. So it basically is the same thing, but it's at a higher level, that they do get assessed in the same way an agent does for their job. They get assessed, and we have a list of tasks and behaviors and everything that we basically assess them on in the same way we assess an agent.
Yeah, that's great. We actually call that a supervisor scorecard. So we use that same,
it is.
It's a range of metrics that are specific to the agent. They kind of overlap sometimes on team performance with agent KPIs, but yeah,
yes.
So that's also, I would love to see your system. But anyway, so David, this is like a whole nother, hour discussion, right? Just about all of these systems for support and certification to tie back to training and then post-training and all of that. This is really, really interesting.
So yeah, we did bring, when I came on with the company, our team leads were brought on actually from being an agent up to a team lead, and there was very little training. And then we decided that we were going to, we just realized that we brought them up because they were great agents, but it really wasn't, they weren't great supervisors. They weren't great team leads. And so we had to start coaching with them on that. But then we also went outside and found a supervisor that had more experience that would be able to help coach our team leads and become better in their positions. But now what we're doing is we've brought on a new LMS system because we did not have one of those at the time. And now we are creating learning paths and paths for our agents to become team leads or supervisors if they want to one day. And they're going to have to go through that, basically, like Catherine said, something similar to like a certification, but it's just internal. So we know that they've got those skill sets that we're looking for, because it's been a struggle. And we use a third-party call center, a BPO right now, that's not offshore. But we're also seeing within their company, they're doing the same thing. They're hiring agents to be team leads because they were really good agents, but then they're getting no training before our peak season, and they're still agents. And so it's still a struggle. And I know with COVID,
Jackie, you're on mute.
That was weird. But I'm not sure where I ended, but they had to get rid of their brick and mortar, and they had to go remote as well. And so I think that's just been a struggle with them too. And so we're working with our third party to say, hey, you've got to get your team leads more training. They're not at that team lead supervisor level that we're really needing to have.
Yeah, that's not unusual. What we've found is it's amazing, because in a call center, the one position that has more direct reports than anybody else, and whose staff tends to naturally turn over more than anybody else, is the supervisor. So what that means is if your ratio is 20-1, let's say, and you've got 100% turnover in a year, and usually it's a lot more than that. With the frontline supervisors, these people are responsible for 40, 50, 60 employees that come into your company, which really no other position impacts that many people. And directly,
a couple $1 million in payroll a year.
I mean, beyond belief. And what we found, the whole purpose for this discussion today, is that level seems, just like Jackie said, to literally get the least amount of training, both new hire, onboarding, and prep time. So you're not alone, Jackie. Hey, I saw that
it's good to have a village.
I saw Jason had a comment here, which I thought was really interesting, what they do in their center, and I'll just highlight it and let Jason take over here. But he mentioned that maybe for some of these reasons, when they promote somebody from a frontline position, they promote them. They don't promote them into a supervisory role that would supervise the same position they came from. They move them to different departments to kind of broaden the experience and not put them in that situation. Jason, you want to either correct me if I'm wrong there?
Yeah, it actually started last year, really, again, like Jackie said, really it was all down to COVID. All of our call centers were pushed remote, and it was how do we develop these individuals? Well, now they're remote, they literally can work anywhere. So now if we have supervisors that are identified, we actually will meet as a group of call center leaders, and we will offer up those resources. We will either move them out as a team lead on assignment with a potential of being promoted, or if there is a gap, they're encouraged to, but we actually stopped moving them up within their current line, because what we found was, going back to what you said, was on Monday, they're suddenly a supervisor with the same group of people on Friday that they were part of a rep with, right? So they're all at the same level, and suddenly someone's promoted, whereas actually moving them out sets them more up for success, because they have none of the history necessarily as they step into their new role with their new team.
That's interesting. Yeah, I read that. It's like, okay, that's interesting. I want to hear more about that. And then Heather, you had commented in the chat, and hopefully everybody can access the chat area because you can see a lot of this stuff in there. But I'd like Heather to elaborate on while there's no formal training, there's a kind of a side-by-side, a peer-to-peer where it's, I guess, supervisor shadows with an existing supervisor for some set period of time. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, we usually have about 10 coaches. We call our supervisors coaches. It's a funny little thing that we do. But we'll have about 10 coaches. We'll have that new hire coach, or not new hire coach, but newly promoted coach, spend, half a day with each coach, existing coach, so that they can kind of see what, how do you spend your time? And they're just kind of going about the day with that person, whether they're coaching an agent in real time on a call, or they're, listening to some calls, or they're attending a meeting, they're delivering performance management, whatever they're doing, that person shadows along with them. And their immediate manager, which we call them an ops specialist, we rename everything, but basically an assistant manager, they'll kind of go along with that new coach and make sure that they're kind of getting all of the information, as they spend time with these other coaches, they're not seeing the same 3 things and missing these other 3 things that they need to learn. So they kind of have a loose list of, these are all the things that we need to cover. These are all the features. These are all the tasks that we want to make sure you learn how to do. But we do like them seeing tasks done by multiple different people so that they can see different ways that, individuals approach a certain task, different ways that they may coach, different ways that they may deliver feedback. And that allows that new person to kind of craft their own style.
Good. Hey, Greg, one thing, I don't know if one of the surveys or you've picked this up along the way, but one thing I've been interested in and wanted to ask the group here, in the last 18 months, obviously since COVID, the things have changed. And have you given your supervisors specifically have you acquired any new and implemented any new technology systems? For example, Zoom, I don't know if your supervisors and the folks that they have at home, do they have access to video conferencing and things like that? And if it's that, let us know how that's worked out, and is it great? Or are you facing some challenges? Or I'm really, that's kind of an obvious one, so I'm really kind of interested in, is there any other technology systems that you've given your supervisors that seems to really have helped them adapt to the virtual environment? And I would not be surprised if the answer is no by across the board, because what we've found at BizJuice, a lot of call centers are trying to make do with the exact same technological stack or technology stack that they had before COVID hit, when everybody was in-house, the same reporting mechanisms, the same, everything's the same, other than, maybe like a behind the scenes, the CCAS system, which has been adapted slightly to deal with remote agents. But I'm wondering, for a supervisor specific role, any new technologies that either you've implemented or that you're contemplating implementing to help your supervisors manage in the new world?
We just encourage us to turn their cameras on, which was a bit of a battle because my center was already remote, and so we were used to the old way of working. Baxter suddenly became this video conferencing organization, and so we looked like the dinosaurs really in our organization because we didn't turn our cameras on. So we had to not only get our supervisors, but also to incentivize our reps. So part of their incentive bonus in 2020 was based on how many times they would actually turn their camera on at town halls, huddles, ACE meetings, which is what we call their one-on-ones, and they got more money the more they turn their cameras on. And now we pretty much have everybody turning their cameras on, whilst the organization now has gone into Zoom burnout and they're turning their cameras off. So yeah, it's it's sort of gone full circle.
Still getting, you said you gotten some pushback on that as the front line.
Well, we were all remote, so we were sort of all used to just being like very sort of like, we didn't turn cameras on, we didn't need to, we had a good way of working, and then suddenly the organization became experts on remote working, right, as everybody got pushed at home, and we had to adopt to the new way of working. So we had to come up with innovative ways to get our folks to turn their cameras on in the new world. Yeah.
Couple of things. I wouldn't say we have new technology. We have upgraded So our incentive system is much more robust and automated. Our LMS is upgraded, has more capability. Our e-learning platform is upgraded with more capability. So we used and had all of these things, but going remote, we had to increase the flexibility and the visualness of it. So not a whole lot of new technology at this point, but upgraded.
Yeah, it's been about 3 years since I was running a large BPO contact center operation. We had a learning management system already in place. We were starting to digitalize our incentive, processes, like awarding points for employees, like based on tenure and performance, and then letting them use those points to buy, gifts and things like that. And so I think, to your point, Catherine, we were moving in that direction. And then what we've seen, and that same organization, had to rapidly move all the way there once COVID hit. So yeah, that makes sense that maybe you haven't implemented new systems, but the ones that you were using currently really had to face quick adaptation, and probably then modified some upgrades, things. Anybody else?
I had more of a question again, but I am curious to hear, with remote work and the change, people talked about constraints and the need for flexibility. I also know, especially with offshore teams, bandwidth to, handle audio calls was a big thing. I'm wondering if any, and I guess I'm thinking to one sort of partner that I worked with where they had an offshore team in the Philippines, and they just switched a bunch of it to SMS because those agents couldn't actually handle the voice calls. I'm just kind of curious if people found that there was like an acceleration in the omni-channel growth, and that people were, by way of just changing habits in general through COVID and people being remote and multitasking, if people saw a change there with regards to, going from voice to other channels like chat.
Good question. Anybody?
Yes, definitely for us, we saw a huge spike in chat volume. It's leveled back out, but we have a lot of other drivers. Being in the electricity industry, we had a crazy winter storm in Texas, then we've had mild temperatures. And so it's kind of not been a normal year for us. Just in general, our spikes are in very different places, where you can go back 20 years and see like this nice steady trend line. And then 2021 is just, it's crazy. So I think our volume would have stayed consistently high this year over last year, were not these other things at play. But definitely seeing more of that. Also seeing our leadership being more open to digital channels. We've launched SMS text for one of our brands. We're looking at video chat. So chat bot, some things that we've kind of always considered, but not had it move along. I think you said earlier, throwing some gas on the fire with the pandemic.
Yeah, we've seen the same thing with our clients, basically asking us, hey, how do we move more of the customers? So kind of on the marketing side, how do we direct more of the customers and get them to adapt to the text and the chat lines of communication versus the live call type of stuff. So anecdotally, we've had a lot more people ask us for guidance in that direction. Hey, Greg, I see we're coming up on about 12 minutes to the hour. I wanted to turn it back over to you real quick here to see if there's anything that you haven't had a chance to hit on yet in terms of your the surveys and the findings that Touchpoint One has learned through either the surveys or from just your own clients when it comes to that frontline supervisor position in the contact center world.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I knew this was going to happen because all of these topics, I mean, we could spend hours talking about any of them. And I think that if I was just to focus on one additional survey question, which there was good alignment on, was 34% of senior managers identified performance intelligence as the most important thing provided by the organization to help supervisors succeed. 26% of supervisors agreed. Now, this is an interesting thing because you can say, well, what is performance intelligence? And if I look at some of the things that we've been discussing over the last 45 minutes or so, this is something that's evolved over the last couple of years. And whether it's because of just evolution of technology and advancements of technology, or if it's because of COVID and the different types of work, logistics and things of working these days, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that we have an ability these days to analyze things in a digitized way with more analytics and really glean an understanding and awareness of what's going on in the organization than we did a couple of years ago. And these advancements are going to continue. So when I look at a survey like this, and I guess the big takeaway, if I had one for this presentation, is that really step back sometimes and think about not just all the analytics that you're collecting, but start to think about these things in the context of whatever the stakeholder is, and make sure that you are really analyzing what the potential disconnect between what senior leadership, who is responsible for providing all of these tools and training, all this support for supervisors, and what they really think, where they actually think the gaps are, and what they really think are the priorities and the needs. So that's kind of was the impetus for the survey we did. And it was just sort of an outside the box way of thinking about it, at least from our perspective. We hadn't seen anything out there research wise that had been done like this before. And it was really, really useful. And I think it's something that, we've continued to do and will continue to do and advise clients to do as well. So.
Well, I know a lot of studies, and again, I cite the one that I just looked at 2 days ago that said that the frontline employees, which is where you're seeing massive attrition in not just contact centers, but everywhere. And a lot of it's due to, the labor rates increasing and just, basically people can shop for, hey, these guys are going to pay me $1 an hour more. These guys are going to pay me $2 an hour more. These guys are offering flexible schedules. But a lot of people came back to, look, I can get paid, what I need to get paid, and it might vary between $1 or $2 an hour. So that's not as important to me as, am I at a place where I think I can grow and actually learn some skills and talent? And that comes down to, if you're a frontline agent, you're looking at your supervisor. You're not looking at the CEO or the C-level or the VPs or anybody, because you're not going to interact with them anyway. It's your supervisor. And then it kind of reminded me of data that I've been seeing for the last 30 years, and that is, what's the number one reason an employee leaves his or her position? And it's usually due to their direct supervisor. They don't think that they're, either they don't like them, or they think they're being treated unfairly, or they're not learning and being developed enough. So I think all of those things just really kind of lead back to contact centers and any other business for that matter. You've got to give your supervisors the training and the tools necessary for them to do their job. And they really need to know what that job is, all of the different components, as Catherine had mentioned, in their certification program. It's not just, hey, how do you handle an escalated call, or how do you coach somebody to sell? It's how do you create and reinforce the culture? It's how do you track? How do you coach and give feedback? How do you document things the right way? How do you set targets? All of these types of things that the supervisors need to know and be taught and reinforced every day to be successful. Because if they're successful, if you've got successful and a good supervisory staff, they're going to impact 20 to 40 to 50, people plus in your organization during the course of the year.
Casey, we've got Lamar on here, who's actually a supervisor, and I was going to ask him for his comments, but then I could see Charity was watching very closely. And so, Lamar, if you'd like to, feel free to comment. We will bump Charity right off of this Zoom call so that you can speak freely. Any thoughts on that, Lamar, what you heard today?
Yeah, I would like to say that, I'm getting a lot of good thoughts to look for further in my team as well from just hearing everybody's feedback. So thank you everyone for providing thoughtful feedback. But yeah, what I noticed working in this virtual environment, they said that training was one of the most important things. I would have to co-sign and say training and technology. So having that technology to support the training is one of the biggest issues that biggest feedback that I get from my team. And one thing I do to try to make sure that we decreased our turnover ratio is to make sure I build rapport with my team by building trust. And, you can easily do that by having those one-on-ones, by having those side conversations, pulling your staff in the meetings, pulling your staff to the side, and just ask them how their day been going. What are we doing great here? What we can do better? And let them know that you're in this with them too. They're not they're not fighting by themselves. You're in it to get the metrics and get their goals, so they can hit their goals as well, and that they're not alone. So once you have that communication with them and had that side conversation with them, just to see how they're doing and let them know that you're in it too with them, and their success is your success, their failures is your failures, and they're not going to fail because you're not going to let them fail. And that's one of the biggest things that I learned that helped me and my team build that rapport. And I just got another promotion for to supervise a new team, and my old team still reaches out to me. So I guess we still have that trust and rapport, and it's just a great thing. So that's what worked out for me.
Well done, Lamar.
That's
well
awesome.
done.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for those comments, Lamar. Also insightful and very helpful. Greg, in like 1 minute, can you kind of summarize and wrap things up for us?
Yeah, I first, thanks for everybody. I appreciate being able to participate with this. I knew it was going to be a great conversation, great insights from everybody. You guys are all working hard, coming from different industries and different backgrounds and everything. And these aren't not difficult jobs, and they're difficult times. So again, I would just step back and encourage everyone to kind of think outside the box and do that kind of comparison of perspectives of different stakeholders, so that you make sure to the extent you can that your perspectives on what's needed by the frontline supervisor and what senior managers think they need and what they're providing are aligned. And it's not a complicated thing to do. So I think that's the big takeaway here, is that surveys are pretty easy to do. And if you get creative about how those questions are created and to whom they are presented, and then doing the analysis on that, the ROI and that sort of exercise is really extensive. So